How do you best describe the work that you do?
Well, I'm a professor in health psychology at the University of Surrey. So I do teaching and I do research. And I suppose mostly of relevance to this is my research. And I'm what's called a health psychologist. And that's looking at the psychological components of physical health. So I'm interested in why people behave the way they do, whether it's smoking, drinking, exercise, diet, going to the doctor, seeking help, taking their medication, and then how all of those things impact upon their physical health. So that can be their tiredness, their pain, or it can be cancer, heart disease, obesity, diabetes, those sorts of things. But it's all about, in an essence, I suppose, it's mind-body relationships. So our mind and how we think and how that influences our physical bodies.
Why have you been doing this for 30 years? It's a long time to be on one area. Why are you so interested in this? Where does that stem from?
Oh, gosh. I suppose I was always, as a teenager, very interested in psychology. I probably didn't know it was psychology, but I'm quite analytical. I like working out why people do what and who has relationships with who and what works and what doesn't work and why people say what they do. So I've always been very interested in people. And so that's my kind of psychological bit. And then I guess I got into it through an interest in eating behaviour. I was very interested in why food becomes so problematic for people sometimes. I had friends with eating disorders. I had a mum who dieted a lot. I lived in a culture of people that had to look a certain way. So I became aware that food was quite complicated for people. And so I kind of got into it through that, really, and looking at why we eat what we eat and how, I suppose, much as kind of eating is a biological process, because hunger is biological, it's just so much more than that. So much more to do with the meaning and the psychology and the culture we live in and the relationships we have. So that's why I got into it. And 38 years later, I still find it interesting.
Coming up to 40 then. Amazing. So one of the reasons why we wanted to bring you on is when we came across your work, it really resonated because we help people transform their bodies, and they have spent decades with bad habits. A lot of it's around food and their relationship with food. And, a lot of people think weight loss or body transformation is just simply, nutrition and training. But there's such a big psychological component that goes into not only getting in shape, but actually being able to maintain good fitness year round. And one thing you mentioned that I want to tap into is actually defining what hunger is, because most people's challenges arise around understanding the different types of hunger, a real hunger, fake hunger, all the different ones. I'm sure you know much more than I do. But I'd love to actually define hunger and then start digging into the different types of hunger that people may experience or may not be experiencing, but how they respond to it as well. So, what is hunger?
Really complicated question. So on one level, hunger is a biological process. So we have signals from our stomach and signals from our brain telling us that we need food. But actually, in reality, those signals are all messed up by lots of other things that are going on in our lives. So we can feel hungry because we see food that we want to eat, and that food looks nice, it looks tasty, it smells nice, and that can make us feel hungry. We can feel hungry because our watch tells us that it's 12 o'clock, and that's called lunchtime, and that can make us feel hungry. We can feel hungry because we're miserable or upset or we're bored, and that is then associated with wanting to eat. So that can then feel like it's hungry. We can feel hungry because we see somebody else eating, and hunger is kind of socially contagious. So that can make us then want to eat because someone else is eating as well. And in the nugget behind all that, there is a kind of biological process, but a lot of that is just to do with our associations and the meaning of food and why we eat, which is so much more than just the biological process of hunger. So when you say to somebody, go back to being hungry, then you need to find out what kind of hunger that is for them and when they are eating, because they're calling all of those things hunger. They're calling, emotional eating hunger. They're calling social eating hunger. They're calling boredness hunger. But we need to find out what bits of those hunger are making them actually eat something.
And how do you pinpoint that? Well, what is it like? Do you have a process or a framework that, from a high level perspective, people can use to differentiate between what's real and what's not?
The simplest way is to watch your own behaviour. So to become kind of mindful of your day and what you're doing in your day, and look at when you're eating, and then look at the triggers for that eating, and try and think out about what's going on that's making you want to eat something. So if you go out for dinner in the evening with someone else and you eat more, that's not because you're more hungry, it's because you're with somebody, and that's called social eating. Or if you eat mid-afternoon because you're a bit bored, then you write that down and you realise that's not hunger, that's called boredom, that's called emotional eating. So basically just diary keeping, keep a record of what you're doing, keep it for a week, write down what you eat, when you eat, what you think those triggers might be, and then try and see patterns in the way that you're behaving and making links between food going into your body and then what's actually happening in your external world in terms of the environment, but also your internal world in terms of your emotions.
And then let's say you look at that diary and you think, okay, there's a lot of emotions here. There's boredom. There's an argument that I had. There's social eating. How much of it is like overcoming effectively emotional eating? How much of it is linked to sorting out what's going on in your life versus just the ability to just push through the emotions and control your food intake? Where is that balance?
Yeah, it depends what you want to do. I mean, if you want to have, years of therapy, then try and sort out your life. If you want to just slightly eat differently, then I guess my tip would be that once you've worked out what those triggers are, that moment's going to come. And then you need to distract yourself from the desire to turn that into food. So if you eat when you're bored, if you eat when you're unhappy, if you eat because other people are eating, if you eat because of the time of day, or you eat because, you're having a drink or whatever those triggers are, at that moment, there'll be a spike in the desire to eat and you need to do something else. So you recognise that spike and you just distract yourself by doing something else instead of eating.
So is it a habitual thing that is the answer lie in that habit change in the moment as opposed to trying to figure out, because some people might go down the route of, right, I need to figure out what's going on in my life. I need to change my life in order to change my eating. But are you suggesting that a better way is actually just to make micro habits change or associations change that will actually probably do better off the other way around?
Well, I mean, you can look into the reasons behind your own emotional eating or your own habits, and they'll probably be childhood. They'll be, the way that your parents brought you up and the culture that you live in. But that's really hard to undo. An easier way is to just get into that moment and decide how you're going to break that association between that trigger and that behaviour.
And what have you seen to be good, successful alternative distractions, so to speak?
Well, it's probably very, very personal to you, but if you're eating because of your emotions and you're miserable, then you need to do other things to cheer yourself up. So, find things like calling a friend, having a chat, putting on a song that you like, dancing around the kitchen, going for a walk around the park, playing with your dog, taking your dog for a walk, watching something on TV, just things which will lift your mood that don't involve food. If you're bored and it's to do with things to do with your hands, find other things to do with your hands, make something or play the piano or do something that you might want to do that's going to distract you from that moment.
And you said earlier, you might eat because it's 12 o'clock. How much value is there in having a set meal structure? I really like the fact that I only eat, I think it's 8, 12, 4, 8. 8, 12, 4, 7 is roughly my eating schedule. I don't really eat in between it. How much value is there in having a meal structure like that for people, especially when they're busy professionals that might be juggling so many different things, kids, career and all of that?
I think it's really, really important to have a meal structure, because when we eat spontaneously, then we make bad decisions. So if we allow ourselves to eat whenever throughout the day and we allow ourselves to snack throughout the day, then often those are not healthy decisions because they're made in the spur of the moment. But if we pin our eating to, breakfast, lunch and dinner 3 times a day, then that's so good for us in so many ways. I mean, one, we're making planned decisions, which means that we're going to know what we're going to eat because we're going to know what's for breakfast, lunch and dinner. When it comes to those meals, we're going to be feeling more hungry because we haven't eaten between meals. And so because we're more hungry, we enjoy it more, it becomes more of an event. But then also we know that if you eat in a kind of mindful way and you think about it and you call it a meal, so this is my breakfast, this is my lunch and this is my dinner, we actually feel more full afterwards than if we just snack and eat at the go. So if we eat walking around the corridors or we eat at our desk or we eat in the car, the food can go in our bodies and it can be the same amount of food in our bodies, but it doesn't fill us up in the same way because we're not paying attention to it. Whereas we have structured meal times and we think this is my lunch, we sit down in a designated space and we have this thing called lunch, it actually fills us up more than if we just eat it in snacks or just eat it when we're on the go.
So what's going on there? What's going on there?
Well, that's because if hunger is so much more than just biology, you put the calories into your body, and those calories obviously get digested and tell your brain and your stomach that you've put calories into your body. But if you're not paying attention to those calories, they don't actually fill you up. Because hunger's a perception, you need the calories and you need the focus on that food in order to actually fill you up. So the more you focus on what you're eating, then the more that food will then make you feel fuller, which means that you then eat less later on.
And by focus, do you mean just presence, like meal hygiene, just being attentive, not having the TV on, that kind of thing?
Yeah, being in the moment, having a meal, not just, eating when you're driving, not just eating at your computer, but calling it a meal, sitting in a designated meal space, sitting down, actually having a moment, which is a kind of eating moment, and then that's much more likely to fill you up.
Do you think it's possible to eat intuitively?
I know there's a lot of evidence and people are quite keen on the notion of intuitive eating. I suppose what intuitive eating means to me is that you get back to what your body really needs, your physical body really needs. And I just think that's really hard to do, because the blurring between what our physical body needs and all those things like social eating, emotional eating, time of day triggers that are in our environment makes it so blurry. It's very hard to get back to that essence of, gosh, at 2:30 in the afternoon, my body is telling me, I need some chicken and rice, because it doesn't really work like that. So I can understand the theory behind intuitive eating, but I just think it's quite a big ask for people to strip away all the other factors and get back to that kind of essence of what your body is actually saying. Because our bodies don't just say things to us, we then interpret what our bodies are saying. And because of that, we make sense of it and it changes how it makes us feel.
Yeah. I think it's one of those things that sounds really good as well as like a way of eating, I eat intuitively. But even I often say that I eat fairly intuitively, but I still have what you call pinned meals. So I can eat intuitively around those pinned meals. Because otherwise you feel like there's a missing structure, and then you kind of start overthinking your food, and you start, especially because we're not living where, if we've got a structure with our work, for example, you've then got to think about your food, and you might just end up going for whatever's quick, and then you're chasing the energy after that.
And there's something about, I talk about sort of putting food back in the box, really, and that food has kind of spilled out to take over so many different aspects of our life. So, you go to the cinema and you eat food, you watch the telly, you eat food, you get in the car, you eat food, you're bored, you eat food. Food has just taken on these multiple roles. And if you're trying to eat intuitively, that each one of those moments, you might think, oh, I feel like eating intuitively. But as the day goes on, there's an awful lot of intuitive eating that's actually going on. Whereas the easiest way to me just thinks, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to eat at meal times. And then that's the decision gone. And I suppose, it's sort of quite lazy on my part, but I don't want to make lots and lots and lots of food decisions every day. And so if I just make 3 food decisions every day, that seems to me to be much easier. And it feels like I'm putting food back where it should be, that that's all it is. It's just, 3 meals a day, end of story.
Yeah, I think food noise is a big contributing factor for ruining the idea of intuitive eating, because then it's just constantly ringing in your head.
I've not heard that term before, but I like that, the idea of food noise, because that's right, because it's, the world is bombarding us with food noise, isn't it? So if you're having to push that away all the time, it makes it much easier than you think, actually, I don't have food noise because I've had my lunch and it's not dinner time. So why would I be thinking about it? Why would I be paying attention to what I'm going to eat next?
Yeah, I think I only came across it when I was looking into the GLPs ones like last year. I think that's one of the big things that they do, is they kind of shut off that food noise. So for people that are always thinking about food, one of the mechanisms, one of the reasons why it can work so well is for that factor. So you're just not thinking about it as much. Yeah,
okay. Well, the other way to do it, rather than taking drugs, is to just limit where you eat and what you eat and where you eat and when you eat, and just have that as kind of a rigid thing anyway. I mean, I completely understand that some people's lives are very chaotic. My life isn't chaotic. I mean, I do have breakfast, lunch and dinner, and I tend to go to bed at the same-ish time and get up at the same-ish time. And, my kids have left home. So I'm not doing that kind of multifaceted juggling that people are doing. So I can see it's much harder if you're doing that. But if you can.
Well, the people that we work with who have young kids and have the long hours at work, if anything, the best thing that works for them is the pinned meal strategy, because decision fatigue just gets wiped off the plate. Whereas otherwise, it's just another decision, as you said. And it's, when you're tired, come out from work, you're going to pick the pizza or you're going to pick chicken and broccoli?
Yeah.
Probably not.
Yeah, no, that's right. And for kids as well, then they know food is coming. I mean, that's the other thing, is that you need to anticipate. You need to learn to manage your hunger. So when you start to feel, when my kids were at home, we used to eat at 6 because that's when their dad came through the door. So 6 was food time. If they start to get hungry at 5:15, then they have to learn to live with it, because they know they've got, 52 minutes or whatever it is until they're going to eat. So they know it's coming. And that sort of planning is really good for you, because then you say, oh, I'm a bit hungry, rather than being scared of hunger or thinking, oh my gosh, I've got to get rid of that hunger. You just live with it. You sit with the hunger until mealtime comes. It's all planned. I know what it's going to happen, and then I can eat. And you learn to tolerate your hunger a bit better rather than being frightened by it.
Yeah, that's a big skill as well.
Yeah.
Big skill. But one thing you mentioned around like just eating with family, but also just social eating, and that combination of family and social eating. Something our members raise as a challenge on the journeys that they go on is the social stigmas that they face when they're making healthier choices. I think you've done a lot of work in this sort of space. What are some tools that people can use to arm themselves against societal expectations of, when they're used to having the beers and the burgers, and so all of a sudden they're ordering salads and a Diet Coke? It can throw the dynamics off a bit, and they can feel that pressure, especially when they start looking better and they start feeling better. Other people start feeling insecure, whatever it may be. How do you? What are some like things that you found in both the research and in the real world that can help people in those situations? You
just have to first believe in what you're doing, don't you? So, I mean, I remember when I used to pick up my kids from school. And I used to have, makes me sound incredibly holier than now, but I used to take a kind of box of chopped up vegetables for them. And we'd go and sit in the park, and they had, carrot sticks and hummus and, pepper and all the rest of it. And the mums used to say, oh, look at you with your healthy box. And they used to mock me for it. And I used to think, it's just ridiculous. I'm not being mocked for trying to do the right thing. And then they would, give their children whatever it was that they were giving them. But I think if you're going to step out of the social norm, it's really hard because people don't like it. So they feel affronted by you being different. It makes them feel guilty about the fact that they're doing perhaps what they shouldn't be doing. And the way they manage that is by challenging you, because then you'll join their gang and then they won't feel so bad about themselves. So I think if you are going through that transition, you absolutely have to believe in yourself. You've made the decision, you're doing this for you, and you're doing it for your children or the other people in your lives. And so you have to believe in it. But also, the best way to maintain any change in your behaviour is to see the positives in it and the reinforcement of what's happening, what you are doing. So, if you are feeling healthier, or you are feeling fitter, or you are losing weight, if that's what you want to do, or you feel better about the way that you look, then make sure you not only just feel those things, but you just record it. You keep a record of it, you stick a thing on the fridge, or, you have a little thing that you write down, or you give yourself a sticker, or you give yourself a tick or a smiley face or something, or you use an app where you can build up whatever it is that you're building up, but something to give you the reinforcement that will say, this is working for me. And that makes it easier to combat negative comments from other people. But the other thing also is just to practice what you're going to say to them, because again, in the moment, it's rubbish trying to come up with something to say when someone makes a negative comment. But practice beforehand. If someone mocks me for eating vegetables or eating a salad or not having a burger with my mates, then just find a sentence that you can use in that moment, have it ready in advance, and then you can say it and you won't be quite so thrown by it.
What's some of your good practice lines? Because I think that's probably the hardest, is like, what do you say to family or friends who are mocking you without sort of losing face?
You can tell the truth, and you can say, I'm trying to look after myself at the moment, and, I'm really proud of myself. I'm proud of myself because I'm trying to look after myself, and this is what I'm doing. Or if you need to, you can lie. And sometimes lying can help you kind of get over the situation. So you can say, actually, my doctor's told me that I need to change my diet. And that has a kind of authority behind it, because some expert has told you to do it. So you're sort of giving the responsibility to somebody else. And you can say, oh, God, I know I'd love a burger, but my doctor's told me I need to start eating more vegetables. And then actually people will go quiet. And that's what you want. You want them to realise they've said something a bit stupid and then go quiet. But yeah, blame someone else. My doctor, my partner, my whatever has told me I need to look after myself, and that's what I'm going to do.
On the topic of psychology and like the link between psychology and change, what over the last 30 years, what have you seen the biggest psychological barriers for people to make lasting changes with their food, their health, their nutrition, and lifestyle, I guess?
I mean, the two obvious things really are, one, the food industry has just galloped ahead with making it harder and harder for us to make healthier decisions, really. So, the number of aisles which are full of food which just isn't good for us, and the advertising that's gone with that, and the pressure with us to eat like that is really hard. And they know what they're doing. So, they'll do meal deals, or they'll do buy one, get one frees, or they'll upsize foods. And so that food industry pressure is really hard. But then just also the sedentariness of our lives, sitting is just really bad for us. And our lives have just become so much more sedentary, really. So, people don't walk to work, they don't use public transport, maybe they drive everywhere, or they just work at home. I mean, and particularly, post-COVID, working at home means people aren't even getting to the place of work. They're just working at their homes, sitting in an uncomfortable place, hunched over their laptops, and they're not getting out at all. So, the world has conspired against us, really, for looking after ourselves. And, they've got vested interests. The food industry, doesn't want to market. You ask, I get asked by the food industry a lot, what is a healthy snack? How can I make a healthy snack? Because they want to get into the snacking market. Well, a healthy snack is called fruit. Buy an apple, buy some grapes, buy a satsuma. Nobody's going to make loads of money out of that and package that up and, make that into something that people are going to buy. So they don't want that. So they're very clever. And they try and get us to eat things which aren't necessarily good for us. So that's the biggest challenge, really. And that means that we're being triggered. I like your idea of food noise. There's lots more food noise than there used to be. Food is everywhere, and it's not necessarily good food. So it's hard to resist it all the time.
What about internally? So that's like an external psychological reason. What about an internal one that you see is blocking people making change?
I don't know whether this has changed or not really, but I think when we're being, as children, food is used more and more to pacify children. So, I mean, this is totally anecdotal, but the number of times I sit in cafes or restaurants and children are sitting in buggies being given food so that their parents can have a chat. Or, you sit in a park and the child is given food so that parents can have a chat. And so food is used not as food, but it's used as a pacifier because they don't want children to make a noise. And maybe we've become, less tolerant of children making noises or being badly behaved or whatever. But we seem to use food more and more to reward good behaviour, but also just to keep children controlled and contained. And if you do that, those children will grow up putting food into all areas of their lives and thinking, actually, I should just eat non-stop all day. Or if I'm feeling a bit agitated or a bit bored or a bit fed up, then they turn to food because that's what's been given to them by their parents.
Really, that's interesting. And have you seen a correlate? Is that have you seen that in the research, or is that more of just an anecdotal thing?
I'm just trying to think whether there's an increase. I don't think I've seen evidence for an increase in emotional eating over time. But I suppose, we've gone from a time of eating 3 meals a day to snacking a lot more. And that's where the evidence is. We're definitely snacking a lot more. And we're definitely using food in more ways in our lives than we used to do. And so it kind of makes sense that that's from our parenting that has changed.
Yeah. What are some of the biggest, what's been the biggest thing you've seen come and then gone over the last, you said nearly 4 years now, in the food nutritional advice space that was really popular at one point and now it's disappeared?
Gosh, that's a good question. I'm not sure. I mean, I'm not sure I've seen it go away. So I suppose that's probably part of the problem. So, there was an awful lot about, fat. Is fat good? Is fat bad? And then there's a whole thing about carbohydrates. And I suppose they haven't gone yet. So what I was shocked by was the demonization of carbohydrates. And that was quite an interesting thing because that kind of came out of nowhere, really, that all of a sudden carbohydrates were a bad thing. But that still seems to be kind of lingering at the moment. And I suppose I came from a world where you didn't really demonize anything.
Really? Was that not a thing?
Well, not really, because if you demonize, I suppose I still think that what we want to do is to eat well forever. So we don't want to have short bursts of eating well. We want to eat well for all of our lives and stay well, for as long as we possibly can. If you start to demonize food, whether it's fats or carbohydrates or whatever it is, then we end up craving the very foods that we demonize. And so it's not sustainable. So, you might go for 6 months without eating carbs, or you might have a low fat diet or whatever. But over time, that becomes the very thing that we actually want to eat. So people just end up binging. And that sort of cycle between starvation and binging is just problematic, really. So I suppose the balance for me has always been about, it's just really old-fashioned kind of eating in moderation, but not demonizing any food group. You can have carbs and you can have fat and you can even have sweet food sometimes, but just don't have very many of the things that you shouldn't be having, rather than demonizing them.
Well, can you talk about the all or nothing mindset? Because that's something we see a lot. People will be doing, dry January, then they'll be on the beers again in Feb. Then they'll be getting ready for summer in April, March and April, they'll be off again. It's just the cycle people are living all through the year or across years. What can people do to break that all or nothing mindset? Is it something you can break? What's the root cause of it? Have you seen much?
Yeah, I mean, 40 years ago, gosh, you make me sound very old I don't like the 40 number. Can we stick with the 30 number?
Yeah, we'll stick with 30. You did correct me at the beginning.
I know I did. I'm now regretting it. My need for accuracy was wrong. I'm taking that back. I did my PhD on dieting behaviour, so that is, a long while ago. But the whole idea about dieting behaviour was that when you demonise food or you try not to eat food, ultimately you end up overeating. So you compensate. And that came from the world of addiction, really. So the world from sort of alcoholism was the idea that if you say, I'm never going to drink again, or that you demonise alcohol, people will crave it. So actually a way of trying to manage that is through controlled drinking. So, small amounts of drinking, but not binge drinking. And so that's where my early work came from. And that all or nothing mindset comes from trying not to do the very thing that you want to do. So, if you say to yourself, I'm not going to go bungee jumping, well, I don't want to go bungee jumping, so I'm not going to crave it. But if I try not to do the thing that I want to do, ultimately, I'm coding that thing in my head as being exciting, as being a treat, as being wonderful, as being nice. And ultimately, I'll just give in and do it. So we're not good at denial. Human beings are rubbish at denial. So putting ourselves into denial can only last for a certain amount of time. So we need to code the thing that we don't want to do as not nice, as something that we don't want to do, that we don't like. And if we don't, then we'll end up giving in and we'll end up overeating it. And that's where that all or nothing mindset comes from, is that you want to get drunk. So you don't drink the whole of January, but actually during January, you're building up the desire to get to drink. And then, you often find with people that in the first week of February, they drink as much as they would have done the whole of January, if not more, because they're compensating for all that absence of time, really. And it's just not good for you.
But what about let's say someone is overweight and they need to lose some weight to get into a healthy range. And as a result, they, by default, have to endure a calorie restriction. How do you approach helping people bridge the gap from a period of calorie restriction to finding maintenance versus using the restriction and then going back up to square one, which is what 95% of people do, right? So how do you apply it to that scenario? Because you can't lose weight without applying a calorie restriction.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. So, but what you want is the kinds of calorie restriction which are sustainable. So, you have less of what you would usually have rather than none of it. So you don't demonize certain foods. You don't cut things out of your diet completely. You just eat breakfast, lunch and dinner 3 times a day. You pin your food to that time. You have planned eating, so you know what you're going to have, and you just eat a bit less. And you don't say never, or you don't cut out whole things, because you are allowed them. You're just not allowed as much or as often of them. But then they don't have the chance to become kind of coded as being special. So you say, I am going to cut down on my calories, but I'm not going to say I'm never going to do this, because in 2 months' time I'll crave it. So actually, and then you change your diet into what would be sustainable for life, really. And that's why fad diets don't work, because you can't, drink cabbage soup forever. You can only do it for the first few months. So why do that? Why not just create the diet now that you want for life, and you set off on that life diet?
I like how you said planned eating as well. So it's not just pinning the foods, but you're also planning the foods in advance as well. Are you a fan of not minimal variety per se, but like having similar things across the week? Or do you have sort of 3 things in rotation? Like obviously everyone's going to be different, but have you found different what are the different kind of strategies you see most people fall into, the bucket, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on your life, doesn't it? And it depends on what your preferences and things, really. But I think I saw a study sometime that most people have 10 recipes or something like that, so none of us are really doing a huge amount of variety anyway. But that's okay. And if you just have a repertoire and you rotate your foods throughout the week, then that repertoire makes it much more sort of controllable and predictable and easier to plan. And then you know what's going to be coming. I sort of was always the queen of the kind of ready, steady, cook kind of approach to eating. So I'd kind of open up a fridge and think, what can I make from that today? And it would turn into one of my 10, 11 recipes that I had, I suppose. And that's fine. As the weeks go by, you're having enough variety, but you're able to have some idea of what you're going to be having each meal. And then you just make better decisions. If you have timed, if you make decisions ahead of time, those decisions are bound to be a little bit better than if they're just spontaneous, grabbing things type decisions.
And have you found that to be a really good way to sort of combat or minimize emotional eating, because you're not having to think in the moment?
Yeah, no, exactly.
You don't have to push through the feelings, so to speak.
Yeah, no, that's right. So you know that food is associated not with your emotions, but with time of day. You know that the kind of foods you're going to eat at those times of days have already been planned before the time when your emotions are kind of high. And so then you eat because of the food that you've bought from the shops, and you buy the food in the shops because you planned what you're going to buy in the shops, and then it's in your cupboard, and then come those meals, it's already sorted for you. I mean, I suppose what you're trying to do is just make good decisions, and good decisions always come ahead of the time when you're starving or you're miserable or you're fed up or you're bored. Those don't lead to good decisions. But the good decisions will be made if you've got some planning and some time before you're making those decisions.
And this can be applied even if you're traveling, if you're at social events. It's just having a sort of a plan of action of like, right, I'm going to try and do this beforehand. So even if you're not in a routine where you're at home every single day, or you've got a structured life like that, it can be applied across the board.
I think so. So. I mean, it makes life sound quite boring, but I mean, I like living like that, to be honest with you, because it feels less chaotic. It's less chaotic and there's less decisions to be made. The decisions, you can then focus. And I like to think that if you live like that, you can focus on the bigger picture, but I'm not entirely sure I do. But at least it can free up your mind to have bigger thoughts, maybe.
Yeah, I think if you can standardize like the non-creative components in your day, like what you're going to eat, it's not that. Unless you're into cooking, it might be a creative endeavor, but for most of us, it's not. Then it does free you for the more creative stuff.
Yeah, no, I think so, exactly. And then you can get on with the rest of your life and enjoy it. And I love the idea of, I'm going to use your food noise, because I think that's exactly right. You're getting rid of the food noise, and then you can just enjoy other stuff, can't you? Think about other stuff and be in the moment much more, to do with other stuff.
Well, I won't take credit for that term. I've definitely taken it from somewhere else. I'm just not sure. I remember it coming in that research.
Yeah.
How's that research impacted your work? Like the GLP, obviously it's going crazy at the moment.
It's just huge, isn't it? I mean, everyone is so excited by it. And, you see so many people who've suddenly lost so much weight. And you think, gosh, that's, really quite striking. I suppose I'm really in two minds about it. So it's fabulous if it works and people are losing weight who haven't been able to lose weight before. And I think that's a wonderful thing for them. And I really don't want to be the kind of, the miserable person who is always kind of skeptical and cynical about these things. But people do put the weight back on. And because they put the weight back on, it brings you back round to square one, which is all at the end of the day about behaviour change. You still need to change how you eat and make better choices. So, it's great that it works, but in the longer term, which is what you always want, you've got to eat well and be more active forever. And so it doesn't get rid of my job as a psychologist. I think what it's done, it's made people think that weight is more biological than I think it is. So they think, look, it's purely to do with what's going on in your brain in terms of your brain chemicals. And I think, okay, obviously it has something to do with that. But at the end of the day, it's still psychological, it's still habit, it's still emotions, it's still life, it's still people in your life, it's still all those psychological things.
Amazing. And I totally agree. If you don't change your behavior, then nothing's going to last forever. To wrap this episode up, for someone who's listening to this who might have been struggling with stress eating, emotional eating, and it's all the psychological components of weight loss or weight maintenance that are challenging them, what are the top 3 takeaways you want them to implement from the moment they listen to this, that they can immediately feel some or relief or improvement, or can make some significant changes? What would be the top 3 summary points for you to impart here?
I think the first thing with eating behavior is you've got to focus on the benefits in the here and now. So, telling people about heart disease, cancer, diabetes, whatever in the future doesn't really work. So as human beings, we're really good at future discounting. So we'll ignore all that stuff because that's in the future. So you have to make your small changes work now. So focus on the benefits and think about, I feel less breathless, I feel stronger, I feel, more alert, I'm sleeping better, I feel more positive about myself in the here and now. So focus on all those positives and reinforce yourself. I think that's the first thing, is build in a reinforcement structure that you can feel good about yourself. I think the second thing is to make little changes. Don't go from being, a burger eater to being a kind of raw food eater. Make small changes in your life that are sustainable. So, add in vegetables and try and take out unhealthy foods, but don't make huge changes because I don't think that's going to work really. So make small changes. And then third, probably, is to be kind of kind to yourself. So when things go well, praise yourself, be positive about yourself, reward yourself and make yourself feel good. But when things don't go quite well, don't beat yourself up. Explain to yourself that this is what happens sometimes and this is a problematic thing and it's actually really difficult, and then just get straight back on to what you were trying to do before.
Amazing. Where can people find more about your work?
Online, LinkedIn, websites, books are out there. I've written 8 books. You can look at my books. I'm writing a book at the moment which is called Ask the Expert. So a little bit arrogant, but it's about Ask the Expert. It's about how to eat well. So once that's out, then they can ask me as an expert and find out what I think.
Amazing. Thanks so much for coming on. And for anyone who's listening, definitely check out Jane's work. There's a breadth of knowledge there.
Thank you very much for asking me.